For decades, Ethiopia relied on foreign suppliers to arm its military. Bullets, artillery shells, and heavy munitions were mostly imported and controlled by external powers. The country's security, its sovereignty, always at the mercy of a global arms market that rarely played fair. But today, the rules are changing. Deep inside Ethiopia's industrial heartland, machines hum, sparks fly, and robotic arms move with surgical precision. A silent revolution is unfolding, not with protests or speeches, but with the clang of metal and the roar of assembly lines. Ethiopia is no longer just a consumer of weapons. It is becoming a producer. And now, for the first time, it is stepping onto the global stage as an exporter of ammunition. But how did this transformation happen? Let's find out. For much of its modern history, Ethiopia's military infrastructure was dependent on outside forces. Colonial legacies, foreign partnerships, and geopolitical interference meant that Ethiopian security was often dictated by the availability of weapons manufactured in faraway lands. But in 1987, a turning point emerged. A quiet but calculated decision that would lay the foundation for a future no one had yet foreseen. This decision was the birth of Homicho Ammunition Engineering Complex, a name that, over the years, would evolve into one of Ethiopia's most significant defense assets. Homicho was not born in isolation. Its creation was a product of Cold War geopolitics, a time when Ethiopia found itself caught between shifting alliances and military obligations. With assistance from Soviet and North Korean engineers, Ethiopia established its first major ammunition production facility. At first, the factory was modest in scale, primarily manufacturing small-caliber bullets for infantry weapons. It was never intended to be more than a supplementary production unit designed to reduce reliance on imports rather than eliminate them. But then, something happened. The world has changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. Foreign military assistance, once reliable, dried up. Ethiopia found itself facing a new era of uncertainty, one where self-reliance was no longer an option, but a necessity. With limited external support, the Homicho complex began to expand its capabilities. No longer just a bullet factory, it slowly transformed into a multi-tiered manufacturing hub, capable of producing everything from sniper rounds to anti-aircraft ammunition. But this wasn't just about quantity, it was about strategy. The Ethiopian leadership understood that ammunition production could not be treated as just another industrial project. It required precision, secrecy, and long-term vision. New sections were added to the factory, each specializing in different calibers and ammunition types. Engineers were trained in advanced ballistics and metallurgy, ensuring that Ethiopia's military would not just have ammunition, but reliable, high-performance ammunition. By the early 2000s, Homicho had become one of the largest military manufacturing facilities in East Africa, operating largely under the radar. For years, Ethiopia had quietly invested in building a supply chain that would feed its defense forces. But it was not yet ready to supply the world. Everything changed with the introduction of modern automation and robotics. In the late 2000s and 10s, Ethiopia made a bold move, one that signaled the true industrialization of its defense sector. Instead of relying solely on traditional assembly lines, Homicho began integrating computer-controlled precision machining and automated loading systems. This shift was transformational for two reasons. It drastically increased production output. The facility could now manufacture millions of rounds in a fraction of the time it took before. It ensured consistency and reliability. Ammunition had to meet global military standards, and automation helped Ethiopia meet those benchmarks. By 2020, Homicho was no longer just an Ethiopian factory. It was a world-class production facility capable of operating at an industrial scale. One of the most overlooked aspects of Ethiopia's ammunition industry is its crossover into civilian metal production. While weapons manufacturing remains the core focus, the metallurgical advancements made at homicho have also benefited other industries. The complex produces specialized alloys used in industrial manufacturing. Some of its facilities are capable of creating precision-milled metal components for construction and engineering projects. This overlap between military and civilian production has made homicho economically valuable beyond just defense. For years, Ethiopia's ammunition production was a quiet secret, something known to those in defense circles but rarely acknowledged publicly. That has changed. With Ethiopia's recent push for economic self-sufficiency, industries like food, pharmaceuticals, and textiles have been heavily promoted. Now, for the first time, Ethiopia is openly embracing its domestic defense industry as a symbol of national strength and self-reliance. The once hidden homicho complex is now a flagship of Ethiopian resilience. It represents the idea that Ethiopia can build its weapons, secure its borders, and chart its military destiny without waiting for foreign approval. But the story doesn't end here. Homicho was never meant to stop at domestic production. In the last 3 months, something new has happened. Ethiopia is no longer just producing for itself, it is selling to the world, and that changes everything. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. For decades, Ethiopia's ammunition industry existed within closed borders, serving one primary function: arming the nation's forces, manufacturing bullets, stocking up artillery shells, maintaining a steady supply for national security. This was the full extent of its role. But something has changed. Ammunition is no longer just a tool for Ethiopia's military strength, it is now a commodity. Ethiopia is no longer just producing for itself, it is selling to the world. In just 3 months, Ethiopia has secured over $30 million worth of ammunition export contracts. This is not speculation. This is not a test. It is already happening. The factories of Ethiopia are no longer just producing weapons of defense, they are supplying global demand. The shift is unprecedented, and the world is taking notice. When the first shipments of Ethiopian ammunition left the country's borders, it was more than just a business deal. It was a statement. It declared Ethiopia as an independent player in the global arms industry, no longer a nation dependent on foreign supplies, but a country capable of feeding the war machines of other nations. The destinations of these shipments remain carefully guarded. Governments rarely advertise their arms deals, and Ethiopia is no exception. Yet, whispers within defense circles suggest that Ethiopian-made ammunition has found its way into multiple continents: African nations looking to arm their forces, Middle Eastern buyers in need of bulk ammunition, and even potential markets in Asia. These are the nations looking for reliable, cost-effective, and high-volume military supplies. Ethiopia, with its modernized production, is in a prime position to deliver. This sudden move into the ammunition export business did not happen by accident. It is the result of a perfect storm of global conditions, all aligning to make Ethiopia's emergence as an arms supplier both possible and, more importantly, profitable. Around the world, military supply chains are under strain. The world's largest arms producers, whether in the United States, Russia, or Europe, are preoccupied with their conflicts, political battles, and production slowdowns. Many nations that once depended on Western or Eastern superpowers for ammunition are now looking elsewhere, seeking new suppliers that can deliver quickly, efficiently, and at scale. Ethiopia has stepped into this vacuum, offering exactly what these nations need: a steady flow of ammunition without the bureaucratic delays, political conditions, or high costs of traditional suppliers. But there is another reason why Ethiopia's ammunition exports are making waves. It is not just about affordability, it is about autonomy. Many of the buyers turning to Ethiopia are nations that, for years, have been subject to strict arms embargoes, political strings, and diplomatic obstacles when dealing with traditional arms exporters. Now, Ethiopia offers them an alternative, one that comes without interference, without restrictions, and with a foreign policy agenda attached. Behind the scenes, Ethiopia has not simply built an ammunition factory. It has built an export pipeline. Selling arms is not like selling coffee or textiles. It requires a highly specialized infrastructure, logistics networks that can handle sensitive cargo, security measures that ensure safe and confidential transportation, and diplomatic agreements that allow ammunition to flow across borders legally. Ethiopia has taken steps to streamline this process, creating a framework that allows its weapons to reach buyers swiftly and efficiently. The country's strategic access to the port of Djibouti has played a key role, allowing shipments to be moved through maritime routes with minimal delay. Meanwhile, negotiations are underway for direct military trade agreements, ensuring that Ethiopia's ammunition exports do not fall into the kind of bureaucratic red tape that has slowed down arms deals in other nations. At the heart of it all, Ethiopia's modernized homicho ammunition engineering complex has scaled up production to meet demand. The shift to robotic precision manufacturing has allowed Ethiopia to produce millions of rounds with consistent quality, ensuring that buyers receive products that meet international military standards. But entering the global arms market comes with a new set of challenges, ones that Ethiopia must navigate carefully. With every bullet that leaves an Ethiopian factory, powerful interests are taking notice. The global arms trade is not an industry that welcomes new players easily. It is controlled by some of the most influential governments and corporations in the world, and Ethiopia's sudden emergence as an ammunition supplier disrupts a market that has long been dominated by Western and Eastern powerhouses. There are already signs of unease from these established arms producers. If Ethiopia continues to scale up its production and attract more buyers, it could soon find itself facing diplomatic pressure to limit its exports. Some Western nations in particular are likely to view Ethiopia's growing arms trade as a challenge to their own economic and geopolitical influence in Africa. On the other hand, Ethiopia's move could strengthen its ties with other emerging military economies, particularly within Africa and Asia. Some nations may see Ethiopia not just as an arms supplier, but as a strategic partner in building a self-sufficient defense industry within the global south. If this trend continues, Ethiopia could go beyond ammunition, expanding into the production of larger weapon systems, armored vehicles, and even defense technologies. But there are challenges. One of the biggest challenges will be maintaining production capacity without overextending its resources. Expanding too fast without securing long-term buyers and sustainable production lines could put Ethiopia at risk of supply shortages or quality control issues. The key to success will be building lasting military trade relationships and securing buyers who return, not just for one-time deals but for continuous large-scale purchases. There is also the question of geopolitical resistance. The world's largest arms producers do not take kindly to competition, especially from a rising African nation. Ethiopia's leadership must prepare for potential political and economic roadblocks, ensuring that it does not fall into the same traps that have hindered other emerging arms exporters. But one thing is clear: Ethiopia has already made its move. The first shipments have left its borders. The first contracts have been signed. The first million have been earned. This is not a test run. This is the real thing. Ethiopia is not just an arms-producing nation anymore. It is now an arms-exporting power. Now the question is, what this means for Africa. For years, Africa's military landscape has been defined by dependency. Most nations relied on Western, Russian, or Chinese suppliers for everything from small arms to heavy artillery. The arms trade was a game played by superpowers, a market where African nations were simply customers, locked into deals that often came with hidden conditions. Ethiopia is breaking that pattern. It is no longer just a buyer, it is now a seller. This shift is more than just economic. It is a geopolitical statement. It means that Ethiopia is beginning to alter the balance of military power in Africa, one bullet at a time. But what does this mean for the continent? And what does it mean for Ethiopia itself? For decades, African nations have been trapped in a cycle of external dependence when it comes to defense. Weapons procurement was controlled by foreign players, often leading to deals that favored the supplier rather than the buyer. Even when African nations paid billions for arms imports, they often faced political conditions, delays, or outright refusals from traditional arms exporters. Ethiopia's ammunition industry represents a crack in this system. For the first time, an African nation is emerging as a regional supplier of military-grade ammunition, not just for its army but for others as well. If Ethiopia continues on this trajectory, it could set a precedent for other African nations to follow. Instead of looking to the United States, Russia, or Europe for their defense needs, nations across the continent could begin to turn to their own. Ethiopia's ammunition exports could be the start of something much bigger, a continental shift towards self-reliant military industries. But Ethiopia's rise in the ammunition market is not happening in a vacuum. Every bullet it exports is a bullet that isn't bought from traditional suppliers. This is not good news for the arms giants of the world. For decades, African defense contracts have been a major source of revenue for global arms manufacturers. Countries like the United States, France, the UK, and Russia have long enjoyed a monopoly over African military procurement. They have built networks of influence, secured multi-year contracts, and positioned themselves as the default suppliers for African governments. Now, Ethiopia is disrupting that dominance. It might start with ammunition, but the ripple effects could be enormous. If Ethiopia succeeds in becoming a steady, trusted arms supplier, what's stopping other African nations from doing the same? This is what makes Ethiopia's rise more than just an economic move. It is a challenge to the established order. History has shown that when a nation threatens the economic interests of global powers, those powers react. Will Ethiopia face diplomatic pressure to slow down its exports? Will international organizations introduce new arms trade restrictions targeting African suppliers? These are real possibilities. The global arms trade is not just about money, it is about control. Ethiopia is showing signs of breaking free from that control. While the world watches Ethiopia's ammunition exports, something equally important is happening within the country itself. Ethiopia's military is no longer just an army. It is becoming an industrial force. For most nations, an army is only as strong as its supply chain. Wars are not won by soldiers alone. They are won by logistics, by the ability to keep the bullets flowing, the tanks rolling, and the aircraft fueled. Ethiopia now has something that many African nations lack, a military industry that feeds itself. This changes everything. Ethiopia no longer needs to wait for international approval to restock its ammunition. It does not need to spend millions on foreign arms contracts for basic military supplies. In the event of a crisis, Ethiopia can continue producing weapons without relying on external shipments. This is a level of self-reliance that few African nations have achieved. And it is not just about war. Even in peacetime, Ethiopia's defense industry ensures that its military remains well-equipped without draining the national budget. Unlike nations that spend billions on military imports, Ethiopia is reinvesting in its economy, keeping money inside its borders instead of sending it overseas. If Ethiopia continues to expand its ammunition production, it could begin to form military trade alliances with neighboring countries. Imagine an African defense network where nations trade weapons among themselves, free from Western intervention. What if the African Union began prioritizing African-made weapons? What if Ethiopia partnered with countries like Algeria, Egypt, or Nigeria to create a regional arms industry? What if Ethiopia's ammunition production led to the first Pan-African defense manufacturing bloc? These are no longer hypothetical questions. The process has already begun. The final question: can Ethiopia maintain its independence? As Ethiopia's ammunition industry grows, so does the risk of external interference. The same Western and Eastern powers that once dictated Africa's arms supply may not be willing to give up that control easily. They may use economic pressure, political maneuvering, or even covert influence to slow Ethiopia's rise. The Ethiopian government will need to navigate these challenges carefully. It must secure long-term defense contracts with African nations, ensuring that its ammunition exports remain steady, expand its technological capabilities, ensuring that it stays ahead in production and quality, strengthen its domestic industry, making sure that Ethiopia's military remains well supplied regardless of foreign pressures. The future of Ethiopia's defense industry will not be decided by factories alone. It will be decided by how well Ethiopia plays the geopolitical game. For now, Ethiopia's ammunition is no longer just a tool of war, it is a symbol of a new kind of African independence. The next question is, who will follow Ethiopia's lead? Will more nations step in? Let us know in the comment section, should more African nations step in? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.